All right, welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today, we have Nick Fury. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So, we met obviously at Jiu-Jitsu with you taking the positional sparring class there, but do you want to maybe dive into a brief background about yourself for the listeners?
Yeah, I've been involved in like physical culture. That's kind of what I'm calling it now, physical culture.
Yeah.
Since I was a kid, just running, jumping, and foraging, and sometimes running amok, and then that translated later in life into training in the gym, and then getting deeper into that and into coaching. And now I'm like 15, almost 20 years into coaching, and have done all kinds of things in between in the coaching space and martial arts. But recently my focus in coaching and strength and conditioning and nutrition was on fighters. And so that's a little bit about my background. Right now, that's not so much my focus. I'm taking kind of like what I learned working with people that have to be able to perform at a high level, and then translating that now to people that are like just living everyday lives that need access to those resources.
Yeah,
which is a little bit funner because like working with fighters, they're a tough group to work with,
Yeah, well, some of the stories I've heard, yeah, I can definitely agree with you there. But you pretty much had the Ultimate Fighter series in your house, right? You basically had your.
I mean, yeah, like I got deep into it, like so for the last 2.5 years, we were housing fighters and developing them on every level. On my end, it was the nutrition, food prep, food sourcing, strength and conditioning, and then, whatever I could do in the way of like mindset and lifestyle. Those were other components of things that we worked on, but I lived with the fighters. I slept next to the fighters. I ate dinner with the fighters. It was nuts, and I'm older and they're all like in their early 20s and just wild, crazy kids. And I definitely a different standard of living that I had envisioned for myself. They have one, like they're okay with like living in a dungeon and training all the time. But yeah, that was a fun experience. I'm glad I did it. The results of like the work that I was able to do while living there was pretty amazing. The boys are fighting right now as we speak in Serbia.
At the MMA Worlds, right?
Yeah. I believe both Christian and Jake made it through the first rounds of fighting yesterday, and we'll be fighting again today. So they're fighting once a day for the next 5 days. I think it might be Tuesday there in Serbia.
So how does that tournament? How does the structure of that tournament work? Because fighting once a day every 5 days. What happens when you get dropped on day one, but still win the fight? You fight the next day with.
You know what?
Those symptoms
I would think that early in that big of a bracket, 32, 36 man bracket, that if you lost your first fight, you're probably out.
Yeah, but if you won, I'm saying if you got dropped, but then still won the fight, you'd fight the next.
If you got dropped.
Yeah, and then you still won the fight, and then you fight the next day.
You're still fighting the next day, unless like you're medically disqualified because of a concussion.
Yeah.
Which
shit. Yeah.
I know the IMMAF is like, it's a well-structured, legitimate organization. But I also would think, though, that if somebody got dropped and won, that they'd grease them through into the next round, despite whether they were concussed or not.
Interesting.
And you want to know, I think that too should be on the fighter in terms of like whether they want to take that risk or not, because being able to get to this tournament in the first place is a monumental feat. You know what I mean? Just qualifying for Worlds, it's pretty freaking tough. And we're talking like 100+ countries competing in this event. Wow. So
So what does it take to qualify? Maybe someone's listening and they're looking, hey, this could be a career path. Or is it even a viable career path? Is this something that can lead on to something else professionally? Or is this
I mean, what we're seeing right now is that the IMMAF, the organization itself, the events that they put on, they are feeding athletes into the bigger organizations. In terms of like using that as a pathway, it's a great amateur pathway into a very successful pro career and then you have to look at like the stage that you're competing on in the IMMAF. Like the lights are bright there. Like these events are huge. You're fighting people from different countries with a lot of like, there's just a lot more on the line than like a local amateur fight. You know what I mean? There's more pride. The accolades are higher. Like, and I would think that doing that through the IMMAF is going to give you like equivalent pressure and reps compared to what you're going to see when you fight in like one of the bigger pro organizations. Yeah,
no, for sure. And what does it take to qualify for something like that?
Okay. Well, it's different by country. Most countries have a state-sponsored IMMAF recognized program. So they have their own state-sponsored amateur circuit. And you would compete in those events within your country, and you would rank each competition. And then I believe some people got in by like cumulative wins and points, and other people were selected to try out. So we have the USFL in the United States. So your opportunity to go to Worlds or any of these like big global events for amateur MMA would be to compete in local events through the USFL. They track your statistics, and then you get invited to like the bigger events like Pan Ams and the different world events. And then, you can represent your country, depending on where you rank.
All right. Before we go into the strength and conditioning side, if someone's listening to this and is maybe interested in trying to go down this road, how do they start competing in the USFL?
USFL. Okay. So you would go to the website. I think it's fightleague.org. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
And then but there's kind of a problem with that. So you would have to look for events that are sponsored by the USFL.
Gotcha. And basically just register to fight.
Yeah. And if you couldn't do that, then I would suggest that you reach out directly to the USFL. John Frank or Jim Nightingale, and they could kind of guide an athlete in the right direction in terms of how to get into the organization and then compete for them.
Gotcha. So, you've obviously had a fair amount of success with athletes, with the Ultimate Fight athletes you had in your house there. Your little reality TV show at home. So, do you want to dive into some of your training philosophy, kind of how you prepared these guys for these events, and eventually, obviously, how they eventually made it into this?
From the beginning, when I first started, working with them, I had to maintain a perspective of like long-term development. So I'd say like the type of programming I had them on was like a slow, continuous development with projecting out years and years and years, in advance of where they were and where we wanted them to be. So slow, continuous training. It wasn't a sexy program at all. Just the basic fundamentals. These are young athletes, right?
Yeah.
Like what I find often, and so they're young athletes and they're in a sport with probably the most impact and risk for injury of like any other sport, aside from like rugby and football and stuff like that. Like every training session something bad could happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's that much risk involved. And I had to factor that into how I was going to develop and execute the programming on my end to make sure that like they were getting continuously stronger, that their conditioning was developing, body composition and such, slowly over time without like increasing their risk of injury.
Yeah. No, that's
so
a
it's a slow, continuous program with very little peaking, to be honest, not through me. Most of the peaking for their conditioning was managed through doing the actual thing.
Yeah.
Something that you talk about, right? In some of your articles, like, because the reality is like, when it comes to like conditioning and peaking an athlete, for martial arts, it's not that practical to try to do it through like training in the gym. Like they really need to be using those muscles in their body, in the way that they're going to be using it in their event with varying intensities, and volumes and such. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Before getting back to the podcast, I want to let you know there's a link down in the description for the Swedes Arts of Fighting underground community. You can get all the help you need for your combat sports training. You get every single Swedes Arts of Fighting training program, online course, and you get access to a range of coaches within the private Discord community. So go check that out, and back to the podcast. These guys were working full-time as well, were they?
Most of the athletes I trained full-time.
Oh, they trained full-time. Okay.
Very few of them worked. A few of them were in school. Some of them had like little odd jobs that they would do, like DoorDash. But the last 2.5 years, I had about 15 to 25 full-time training athletes.
Wow. Okay. So what a typical week? Oh, gotcha. So what are the typical training week look like? Say Monday to Saturday or Sunday.
So it started. Okay. So every day they would train. It was a 2-hour block of training. Tuesdays and Thursdays were dedicated to just recovery work. So breathing, mobility, little bit of yoga, mostly mobility. Monday, Wednesday, Friday was like structured like a push-pull with a little bit of conditioning. I always did an hour of like accessory work with them before we got into like their programming. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the 2-hour block, they started each session with movement flows, breathing, tissue mobilization, sometimes general and specific. Then we would go into like pull-ups and deadlift, and then a little bit of a conditioning round, and then a structured cool down. That was like the nuts and bolts of the programming.
Nice. Okay. So you do that hour in the beginning. So the actual strength work itself, how many exercises would you have in there? Would it just be, say, pull-up and deadlift and then the conditioning? Like kind of low volume that way?
No. I had it like all laid out based on where they were at with their individual difference in terms of like where they were at with their strength. Like, the sets and reps were different for each of the athletes.
Gotcha.
How many they were performing. I used the older OPEX model, and some of the stuff that they were able to like draw from early CrossFit and just looking at other sports to create like a blueprint for the benchmarks based on body type that you would want to see. So I was monitoring like every one of their lifts and then trying to get them to a reasonable percentage of where you would want them to peak professionally within the period of time that I had them. And the programming was adaptive though, because like as much as I would want to create a program for them that was laid out, that was progressing them each week, that just wasn't a reality with their training load. So like, say I wanted them to do a percentage of their 1 rep max on a Friday, and that's what it called for in the programming. Like that rarely ever worked that I was able to do it like that specifically.
Yeah.
because it was hard to factor in like all the other things that they were doing and like how they were actually going to feel when they showed up for the session.
Yeah, for sure. That's always a thing that sometimes just straight programs don't allow you to do, is have that variability, because you never know, you know, if you had a hard session on Thursday, you come Friday and that's just not happening, whatever's on there.
Yeah. And when I had them on a program where they were progressively loading week by week at percentages of numbers, like maybe targets or stuff that we had already tested, when I had them on structured programming like that, and I pushed them through it, I noticed like a negative effect in a lot of them in like their rates of recovery. Nobody ever got outright injured, but they did experience a lot of tissue stress that I just felt was an unnecessary risk. Another thing that I really worked hard at with the programming that I developed for them, was trying to ensure that I wasn't pushing them so hard each session that they were sore.
Yeah.
So, and that I had to like monitor session by session and athlete by athlete. Like,
yeah, for sure.
It was all over the place. But I had benchmarks and targets, and we were working towards those for each one of them in an adaptive, continuous way. You know, it wasn't. Sorry.
What did the conditioning look like at the end of most of those days? Did that change based on the day or the athlete throughout that?
The conditioning would change kind of based on the period of where they were at. So it was mostly like long aerobic conditioning for a lot of them. Very little intensity in my programming, knowing that like on any given day, they would get more than enough intensity through their live rounds, which almost every single one of their training sessions ended with live rounds. And there wasn't a lot of coordination on my end with the other coaches in terms of knowing like, oh, this athlete's going to spar at this intensity this day. And so
that's frustrating.
Really, I tried to build up just that long aerobic base to keep them healthy. Because at the end of the day, for those short bouts of intensity that they're going to need in their fights, they do need like a big engine, you know, in terms of metabolic conditioning.
Yeah, for sure. So what did their technical training schedule look like? Because obviously you mentioned they did live rounds at the end of most of their technical sessions. Were they training Monday through like Saturday once a day with their technical
Some of them
training?
were training 7 days a week. Some of them were training 6 days a week. Some of them, most of the guys that were training full time, they were putting in like 5 to 6 hours a day of training.
Holy shit.
And I didn't always know like what their technical rounds looked like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know, some of it too is, depending on where that athlete was with their specific skill sets, there might be more boxing training or kickboxing or wrestling or, you know, so yeah, I wish I would have had the opportunity to like meet with all the coaches and like present my end of the programming and then have that come together with like their technical rounds and when and where they had intensity, but that just wasn't a reality of what I was able to do.
Was that because of the coaches that were there that you couldn't do that, or?
We just didn't really talk a lot, you know? Originally I worked with the team out of 10 Planet, right? Yeah. Well, I didn't train at 10 Planet. I met a few people and then I ended up getting referred into this position where I'm coaching all these athletes. And that's how everything built up. So I wasn't actually on the team and meeting the coaches daily, or I would just see them at events. Yeah.
Okay. So I understand what you have to go through with stuff like that, and trying essentially having to guess, you know, what's going to happen when, and just not do too much where you're going to over push the guys so that when they go to technical training or they come from technical training, that you're not adding so much more on their plate that, it pushes them over the edge.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely had to work with that a lot.
Yeah, that's frustrating. But within the weeks itself, so they were doing 5 to 6 hours of technical training and then the extra training with you on top of that, or was that 5 to 6 hours?
Maybe the 5 to 6 would be total training for the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of, to be honest with you, and this is the reality of just what I was presented with in like their states of development. A lot of like the strength and conditioning work I did do was based on recovery, because if you look at martial arts and MMA as a sport, like it's a movement-based sport, right? And for a lot of these athletes to perform at the highest level and acquire new skill, they need a lot of mobility, right, in their bodies to prevent injuries and just to create space for them to move technically within. So that first hour of every session to hour and a half was just completely dedicated to like making improvements in that space, because I don't know what your experience is with like movement dysfunction, but I've found in my practice that eliminating those barriers to movement automatically translates to them performing better at a specific thing without even training that specific thing. Does that make sense?
What kind of things were you doing then within that hour for the mobility?
Basically, like, you're familiar with the FRC program, right?
Somewhat.
Okay. What's your understanding of FRC?
In terms of it's like joint, full joint movement, basictioning,
Yeah. I mean, so that was the nuts and bolts of what we were working on. Stretching, breathing, tractioning out tissues with different tools like bands and such, and
gotcha.
Sometimes rolling stuff out of tissues, but really, and then so trying to open up more movement space, and then using movements to like keep that space. So like, if your ankles are tight, we mobilize the ankle, and then let's put you in a position where you can actually use the ankle mobility. So like a squat, for example.
Yeah.
I wish like I could say that like there was a lot of like technical work going on. It was very basic. These are young athletes, so.
That's a good point you make there too, because a lot of people will think, okay, whatever, I'm restricted here, so I'm going to do whatever it is to get more range of motion, but then they don't do anything to really cement that in. They kind of just, I can get a little further in whatever it is I'm doing, but they're not loading it. Like you mentioned there, for example,
every single one of those positions has to be loaded in order for that to actually like work for you. Yeah. I think a lot of people get confused and thinking that like great flexibility and range of motion is going to equal like your ability to produce force in that space. And that's just not how it works.
Yeah, unfortunately. Otherwise it'd be very easy.
Yeah.
Nice. So along with all the MMA stuff, you're obviously training yourself in jiu-jitsu. Are you implementing any of these things with your own training?
Yeah, completely. I mean, the way my programming is structured now is it's pretty interesting. So I've actually, incorporated cold work, which the benefits have been just amazing in terms of like my ability to recover. So cold work, sauna, breath training, and mobility every day. Super light strength and conditioning. Like I'm 42. Like my rate of recovery right now is it's not what it was when I was younger. So I'm just trying to get progressively stronger each week. Yeah. And then I'm using the mats to develop my conditioning. But gotcha. I do a fair amount of like zone 2 work each week, like walking, light jogging, running, hiking, to keep building my aerobic conditioning and keep my system healthy.
Nice. Do you want to maybe dive into some of your breath work? What are you doing there? Do you have any like protocols that you use there or progressions?
I mean, I'm using pretty much right now, I'm using 2 different systems. So the box breath for relaxation.
Do you want to maybe explain that one?
4, 8, 9, 4. So it's breathe in for 4. I mean, what we're looking to do is like lower the rate of respiration, right, and inspiration, which ends up increasing our CO2 tolerance. That increase in CO2 tolerance allows us to carry more oxygen, thus resulting in improved aerobic output, but also tapping into the nervous system to be able to modulate periods of like excitability and then resting and digesting and relaxing. So the box breath to rest and create states of recovery, a better state for recovery. And then I'm really still just diving deeper into like the fire breath from Kundalini yoga, the Tumo.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you want to go into a bit of that? I know nothing about that.
Are you serious? Okay, well, yeah. I mean, I want to say, like, I've been practicing this stuff for like 5 to 6 years.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning every single day about how these things work and affect the body. But this is what the research is showing, is that these different breathing sequences can potentially give people more control over their physiology. Obviously, I don't want to say his name. I'm not going to say his name, but we do know a guy, right, that's out there that developed a system. Mm-hmm. And they studied his ability to thermoregulate consciously. That's proven. Control his immune system. And I think there were some other things that they were able to prove.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of like what can be done. And I mean, I don't want to like go into another space of spirituality, but I mean, breathing is like fundamentally the one thing that we have to do continuously. Otherwise we die. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's the source of how we live. It's the air, it's the oxygen we take in. And, I 5 to 6 years ago when I picked this up, I noticed that one, I didn't breathe in a way that was healthy, held my breath all the time, had no control over my breathing, had no diaphragmatic control. And then I started seeing that in other people, in athletes I worked with. And so I found this as like an easy way to actually help people improve their performance, was just getting them into very simple breathing. Just be conscious of your breathing to start with. And then going deeper, inhaling in through the nose and out through the mouth. And then playing with the different sequences, like Tumo, for example, which is a rapid inhale, exhale through the nose, ideally, or in through the nose, out through the mouth. And then using this to actually, for performance.
Okay.
Like from the Oxygen Advantage, for example.
Yeah.
Are you familiar?
Yeah.
So teaching athletes how to control their breathing while they're performing. And then like before and after. So the guys I worked with had a charging program that they would do before their events. And this is something that we practiced every day in their training. And then they would have different breathing sequences to perform in the event. Some of them that generate force. Most of the breathing to just, I wouldn't say stay relaxed or calm per se, but to stay conscious and to keep fueling their system with oxygen.
Yeah.
And then recovery sequences in between rounds. And we had a lot of success with people doing this. And I've had a lot of success with myself utilizing these breathing sequences in my own training.
Did you know you can represent Sweet Arts of Fighting while you're training? We're more than just a membership. We also have rash guards and shorts. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that we have the Sweet Arts of Fighting 2.0 shorts, and we also have the Sweet Arts of Fighting short and long sleeve rash guard. There is another design coming soon, but you can get those on xmarshall.com, and you can go down the description and you can find that. And back to the podcast. Do you want to maybe go into some examples of those sequences? Like, for example, before you're charging one before the fight, the between round recovery one, and then the one after?
Yeah. So the charging, what we would do is to get the nervous system fired up. It depended on the athlete because, believe it or not, charging the diaphragm rapidly, that's going to be dependent on practice. So some of the athletes would be 5 to 6 sets of 30 breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth fast, with a static hold at the end of each set, and 2 to 3 long diaphragmatic rib cage chest recovery breaths in between each charging round. So we would do this ahead of the event to improve their ability to carry oxygen, to get them into a state mentally where they're like focused. It's almost like a mini meditation for them to like do the breathing before they even start moving. So that would be the charging routine. And then it would be long continuous breathing, depending on how much rate of force they were producing in the fight, right? Just taking air in, keeping the mouth closed, and then bearing down when they're generating a ton of force and power, and then going back to that breathing. And then in between rounds, we would go to the box breathing or just the slow diaphragm ribcage chest. Yes.
Okay.
And, I'm still like figuring this all out, like how it works, why it works.
Yeah.
And most of what I know now is that it does work.
Yeah. So it's funny because I had in Romania, so I have been exposed to this. In Romania, we had I think she was a sports psychologist come and was teaching that exact thing, the charging and the recovery breathing to the players.
Yeah. There's not a lot of literature written about this applied to MMA. And so I basically everything I've been studying is like old yogic texts. And then I read about, so like there's a specific system in the yogic text that it says that it helps within the body. And I find that thing and then I pair it with the MMA. And then I'm always experimenting with it to see if there's a better or a worse way. But the charging, the continuous conscious breathing with learning how to, not really Valsalva, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Is it similar to Hicks and Gracie in that old documentary?
Yes.
What, choke? Is it choke? Yeah.
I think it is choke. Yeah, but to be able to generate force and then to get them into the most relaxed, calm state possible in between rounds. And there's a group actually in California that really kind of expanded my awareness to this. Are you familiar with Underwater Torpedo League?
No.
Or Deep End
underwater
Fitness?
Hockey?
It's underwater. It's underwater rugby.
No way.
It's underwater. It's underwater rugby with a torpedo that they throw with grappling.
What the?
Yes. You got to look it up, but I wish there was like more scientific technical specifics that I could throw out there about the breathing, but like from the people that I learned it from, and this, I mean, there is stuff that people can go look up, like if they really need that, but from the people that I learned it from, these were appliers of it, like in under high stress situations, like the UTL guys, the guys from Deep End Fitness, they were former Marine Special Forces, and said they use these simple techniques to stay relaxed and calm under insanely high pressure. Okay. So I would check them out.
Yeah. So where would you recommend if someone wanted to learn more about the breathing? They go just there, or are there other places?
Well, there's the Oxygen Advantage, which would be one book to read. There's a Russian system called the Buteyek method.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. They reference that in the oxygen advantage, right?
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Kundalini yoga. They have a free educational site online that you can go. Okay. I think it's through 3HO, which is like the main Kundalini yoga group. And then self-experimentation. Like, it's one thing to like read academic research and then like say, okay, this is a great tool that I want to apply to the people that I'm working with. But I think self-experimentation before you start working on it with other clients is super important. Yeah. Like making progress in that space on your own and then implementing it into your programming is a responsible way to like use it. I definitely think it's a game changer as a tool for helping athletes like really understand their physiology better and how to use that under pressure.
Yeah, I need to do a deep dive into this stuff too. But do you ever have fighters with issues that can't breathe well through their nose? So this breathing technique doesn't quite do what it needs to?
Yeah, and that's so great. Like, they can't breathe well through their nose. There is some evidence to show that, like, actually working through the exercises can help with some of the remodeling of, like, the sinus way and opening up more air, their ability to take in more air over time. But yes, like if they've had breaks and such and then they can't get air in, then obviously we have to use mouth breathing as well.
Okay. Yeah, because there's my wife's friend, she did the sinus surgery or something where they go up the nose and they clear out all the sinuses. Apparently that was game changing, and I'm like, shit, maybe I need to go try do that at some point.
Interesting. A surgery.
Yeah, it's like not too invasive. I think they go up the nose and they clear out all the sinuses.
Just to clear it all out.
Yeah.
Interesting. But practicing the breathing itself, you start to notice that that it's actually working that system.
Yeah.
And starts to really open up your space to breathe.
Yeah. I'm so bad at implementing a lot of the stuff with myself just because I'm lazy.
Yeah.
I need to do it because there is value. Like, so many people are doing this stuff and seeing, benefits. I mean, it's basically meditation, right? As you mentioned.
It is.
I mean, something you can do.
At the end of the day, that's what it really is. And it's so beneficial for everything else in your life and keeping you staying focused and, more discipline and then being able to relax when you want to relax and then being able to stimulate yourself through your breathing when you want to raise your level of excitation, It's
Are you ever using meditation app, like guided meditation apps then for this stuff?
I am not using any guided meditation apps. I'm just experimenting on my own.
Solo.
Yeah.
No sounds, no input, just silence.
Well, I mean, I do my breathing and then I do my cold exposure. I do my breathing for like 20 to 30 minutes straight.
Wow.
And maybe I include like some different mobilizations in between. I've also found too that it's very interesting that you can use these different techniques with different postures and get slightly different results in your body.
Like, dive into that a little.
Like being able to use the diaphragm to help assist in opening the hips, like a pigeon pose, for example, and then charging the diaphragm in that position. Once your diaphragm actually starts to get strong too, you start to see like how much actual movement that it creates in the body, like specifically in the hips. It's crazy.
Okay. I need to do it's similar to almost, instead of holding a stretch for time, you hold it for a certain number of breaths, right?
Breaths. And then you're actually like fueling that activity, right? With the nourishment it needs in the way of oxygen to be able to, for those tissues to like remodel and get stronger and, or whatever, relax and, whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah. Nice. And now you've moved from Texas to Seattle. What have you got in the works now in terms of career-wise? What are you starting to create?
Well, I've got my clothing brand, which should be going live sometime in March, Politely Violent. So, I've got that, rash guards and athletic wear through Politely Violent. That's coming online. I'm doing a little bit of strength and conditioning work with remote clients.
Yeah.
I need to get better, on the digital end, like you are, like getting online and actually, building that out. And then I've got the gym opening in 60 to 90 days. So Seattle Grappling Academy and Village of Wolves, Seattle, which is pretty exciting. And that's going to be like my focus till I get that stabilized and running the way I want it to run.
Nice. So if anyone's in the Seattle area and looking for a place to train jiu-jitsu, you need to come along for sure.
Yeah, Seattle Grappling Academy, or at this point, come to Marcelo Alonso, BJJ.
Nice. There we go. I think that's pretty much everything. All the topics that we've covered there. But do you want to maybe let everyone know where they can find and follow you, Nick, and see what you're up to? Yeah,
you can reach me at Flow Performance Coaching on Instagram, and that'd probably be the best place to reach out to me at this point.
Perfect. I'll throw that down in the description anyway. So if you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, whatever, it'll be down there. But thanks for coming on, Nick. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.